Welcome to Delicious Italian. Today what I'm going to be making and showing you how to make is sugo alla bolognese or bolognese sauce. Now bolognese is a rich, deep, slow cooked sauce, so good on pasta, any shape, any size, equally good as lasagna alla bolognese with white sauce and cheese, but that's a video for another day. I have my ingredients in front of us here. Let me tell you what I have. So I have olive oil and I have butter. Not all red sauces begin with butter, but this one does. I have a couple of yellow onions, which I will chop. I have sliced mushrooms. I have carrots and celery. I have tomato paste in a tube. Seems a little funny, but it's a good product. And I have a couple of cans of San Marzano tomatoes. I always talk about San Marzano tomatoes. They're the best. That's all I use unless I'm using fresh. But in this case where I need canned tomatoes, San Marzano is my choice. I have a nutmeg, which will grate into the sauce. And I have some bay leaves. I have, of course, salt and pepper. And I have white wine. Now, most red sauces have red wine in them. This particular sauce calls for white wine. I have a couple pounds each of good quality, hormone-free beef and pork. Now, typically, bolognese sauce is made with beef, pork, and veal, but I don't prefer to eat veal, so I just use the two types of meat, but whatever your preference is what you could use. The main thing is that all these ingredients come together to make bolognese. Now, I don't have this ingredient out, but I'm going to be adding milk to this sauce, which is also an unusual ingredient in a red sauce, but that's in the fridge and I'll get it out later. Let's get started. So I'm just finishing up with my onions, and I'm going to cut a couple of stalks of celery. I'm trying not to cry, but that's not working so well. Make sure and get those fibers out of the celery before you chop them. We don't want those in there. Just give it a good slice down the center here. You don't want all of your vegetable pieces to be about the same size, but that's always true in anything that you make. That way everything cooks at the same rate. All right, I'm just finishing up with my carrots here. These are all in a small dice. Like I said, pretty much the same size. There we go. We have a couple of heirloom carrots there, a couple of stalks of celery, a couple of yellow onions, and some mushrooms. Time to get started on our sauce. All right, getting started here, I had added 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil and 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter to my pan. And then I added our carrot, celery, and onion, also known as mirepoix, to the pan. I'm letting it get nice and soft and get some good color on there before adding the meat. Now you'll notice that I have not added our mushrooms, and that's because I like to add the mushrooms after I brown the meat, just because they tend to break down so much. All right, we're just about ready to add our meat to this pan. These vegetables will cook much longer as the whole process goes on, but they have some good color. There's some nice color on the pan, and I think we can add our meat. And I just add the meat to the pan with my hands, kind of breaking it up a little bit as I go. Makes it easier for the meat to start browning on its own. Sometimes you have to do it a little bit at a time. So in goes my beef. And there's some pork in here now. Now, as the meat cooks, it begins rendering its fat out. I do use 80-20 beef because I like that fat that it brings. I just think it tastes better. But if you want to use a leaner cut, that's perfectly fine. Now, as I brown our meat here, I don't want to add salt to it just yet because I don't want it to release too much of its liquid. I really want this to brown. So I'm going to add in my bay leaves right now. I have 4 small bay leaves. And I just add those in. Keep stirring this around. Not too much or it won't brown. I gotta leave it alone now. All right, our meat is browning nicely, and now I think I'm going to add our mushrooms in here. Now, I don't want to add salt to these mushrooms just yet, so I'm just holding off on the salt, like I said, with the meat and now with the mushrooms, because the mushrooms will definitely put out a lot of liquid if I add salt to them. So even though there is some salt in here, I don't want to add any more on top of this until our mushrooms have cooked down a bit and browned a bit in here with this meat. Okay, so everything is nicely browned now, and I'm going to add some tomato paste right in the bottom of the pan. I just like to do it in the bottom so it kind of gets down in there. I would say that's a couple of tablespoons. This will give it some nice deep flavor. All right, at this point, I just want this paste to cook down a little bit on its own. I'm going to add in some nutmeg. I like to use a whole nutmeg and I just grate it right in. Now, a lot of times I think you'll see a recipe and it calls for just a teeny tiny bit of nutmeg, but I really like to use quite a bit of nutmeg because it's that underlying flavor that is so distinctive in Bolognese sauce. And so you need to add a fair amount so that you can actually taste it in there. Let me give this a stir really quickly before I add some more. I could smell that nutmeg hit that warm pan and it smells so good. But that is just a very characteristic ingredient in Bolognese, and it needs to be there quite a bit. Now I have a whole nutmeg, but I'm not going to use quite all of it, but I'm going to use quite a bit. Okay, there we go. Stir that in. And now I'm going to season some salt. I will taste this later for seasoning, but not until all the flavors have come together and cooked down a bit. All right, now I'm going to add my tomatoes to this pan. It's a crowded pan. I don't mind though. We may not need all of that tomato. I'm going to reserve some and decide. Sometimes you need it to be a little saucier, and sometimes I like it thicker. If I'm making a lasagna with this, I definitely want it saucier, and I'll add more tomato because I also have to add the milk to this. But this is going to go on pasta tonight, and I do like it nice and thick and hearty. You could see that texture, and when we add the milk, it's going to loosen that up a bit too. So I'm going to turn the pan down to medium right now because it is bubbling vigorously, as you can see. Okay, so I've added almost all of the 2 cans of tomatoes. There's about a half a can left, and I'm going to leave it at that. I think I have plenty of tomato in here. Now, typically, Bolognese sauce has rather an orange color, and that's because once the milk goes in, it dilutes this, and this red color will become more of an orange color. Going to turn my fire back on to medium high and just let this cook down a little bit before I add my milk. All right, so our sauce is just about ready. I've added a couple of cups of milk in here, whole milk. You don't need to use cream, milk is just fine. I think you can see that it's changed color. It has more of an orange color rather than a red color. This can cook down a little bit more and get really super deep and flavorful. I'm going to add a couple more tablespoons of butter right to this pan. That's going to give us a really nice silky richness right at the end. And this is ready. Well, here is our sauce. It looks delicious. It smells even better. I hope you enjoyed this recipe video, and I hope you'll join me again for more delicious Italian. Buon appetito!